"Good luck finding your way back, Mom." They laughed. The two figures I once called my children vanished into the storm of sand, leaving me alone in the boundless Egyptian desert, where only the wind and despair kept me company. How did a mother's love turn into her greatest curse? This heartbreaking story has yet to find its ending. Join us on the journey to uncover the truth and seek justice for the abandoned old woman in the desert. My name is Martha Thompson, a 67-year-old widow living in Minneapolis, Minnesota. My life has been full of ups and downs, but I never imagined that betrayal would come from my own family. After the sudden death of James Richardson, my husband, everything seemed to change in ways I could not understand and filled with bitterness. James was a wonderful man. He was a perfect husband, a perfect father, and someone I had admired throughout our marriage. We had spent 42 years together, filled with both joy and sorrow, evenings sitting by the window, talking about our future and our dreams. James wasn't a public figure, but he always made me feel safe and loved. His death was a shock, not only mentally, but also a financial collapse. When James passed away from a sudden heart attack, I felt like the world had crumbled around me. I had not only lost my beloved partner, but also my companion in every major decision. But it was also during this time that I realized that the truth was not always as simple as it seemed. James left me a large fortune, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about money. This wealth was the result of many years of hard work and careful planning by James. But I didn't realize that this very wealth would be the thing that changed my family, especially my daughter Lily, in ways that I no longer recognized them. Lily is my only daughter, a beautiful and intelligent woman. But as she grew older, I began to feel a growing distance between us. From the time she was young, Lily was never a particularly close child. She had always been inclined to pull away and moved to California after graduating from college, only contacting me during holidays and frequently asking for money when she needed it. At first, these requests were small amounts to help her get by, but after James's death, they became much larger. She began asking for help paying off large loans, credit card debts, and even loans for bad life decisions. The so-called family wealth had become a sore topic between Lily and me. Every time she called, it wasn't just to check on me, but to ask for money. I knew Lily wasn't a bad person, but I felt like I was being taken advantage of. Things only seemed to get worse when she appeared at James's funeral, saying that she wanted to make peace and be there for me in my difficult time. Honestly, I was touched, but when I looked into her eyes, something didn't feel right. I didn't want to see my daughter become selfish and greedy, but I couldn't deny that the signs were becoming increasingly clear. While I was trying to overcome the grief of losing James, Lily continued to push me into another world, a world of acquisition and exploitation. She suggested a trip to Egypt. "Mom, we've talked about visiting the pyramids and the Nile for a long time. It's time we do it in honor of James," Lily said with a sweet smile. I thought it would be a chance for us to heal our relationship and fulfill a dream James had once promised. But little did I know, behind that invitation was another plan, a scheme I couldn't yet see. When I agreed to the trip, I thought it would be an opportunity to find peace in my heart, to breathe fresh air, and admire the great monuments that James and I had always dreamed of. I didn't realize that this trip would become the turning point when I realized how much my daughter had changed. From the loving daughter I once knew, now I could feel the coldness and calculation in every gesture from Lily. We flew to Cairo one autumn morning. The first few days in Egypt were beautiful. I visited the pyramids, sailed on the Nile, and felt like I was living in a dream. Ethan was always friendly and thoughtful, like a model son-in-law. He always smiled and took care of me, constantly reminding me of the memories I had with James. But I began to feel that something was off. Every time I asked about his family or inquired about financial matters, Ethan would avoid or give vague answers. This strange feeling lingered, and I couldn't explain it. On the fourth day of the trip, things became clearer. Ethan took me to a remote Bedouin village hours away from Cairo by car. I felt unsafe, but Ethan assured me this would be a great chance to explore authentic Egyptian culture. Although Lily seemed a bit anxious, Ethan's persuasion made me feel secure enough to agree. We drove into the desert, and suddenly the car stopped. Ethan said there was a problem with the engine and asked me to help him get the toolkit from the back of the car. I stepped out, and in a matter of seconds, I heard the car door slam and turned around to see them driving off, leaving me in the desert where there was only sand and the vast sky. Ethan yelled back from afar, "Good luck getting home, Mom!" And then they disappeared into the dust storm. It was just me and the painful truth I had been abandoned, discarded like an old piece of luggage. Shame and rage surged within me, but I couldn't contain it. Deep inside, a quiet fire began to ignite. I would not let myself die here. I would survive, and I would make them pay. The first feeling was utter confusion. I didn't know what to do. I just knew I had to act immediately. But in those moments, I realized this was my opportunity to prove that I wasn't the weak woman they thought I was. When Lily and Ethan's car disappeared into the dust storm in the desert, I felt swallowed up by the vast, cold space. I stood there surrounded by endless golden sand, stretching to the horizon, completely alone. There was no one around, only the howling wind and the sound of sand scratching underfoot, as though the world had turned its back on me. I looked around, no sign of life. Nothing. My heart was filled with pain and resentment, but one thing was clear: I couldn't give up. Lily and Ethan might think I was weak, but they didn't know that I wasn't the type of woman to be easily defeated. I stood there for a while, looking towards where the car had vanished. My heart ached, not because of the betrayal I had suffered, but because of the crushing loneliness that I had never felt so deeply before. In those moments, I truly felt the frailty of old age closing in on me. I had lived for 67 years, and never had I felt so small and weak as I did then. I wondered if I could survive this challenge. Would anyone come to my rescue? Or would I die here, forgotten like an old woman who no longer had any worth? These questions tormented me, but instead of letting them drown me, I decided to stand up. No, I told myself, Martha, you cannot give up. I felt the presence of my lost loved ones, including James, my deceased husband, in my mind. His image appeared, reminding me that I was not alone, that I had lived a strong life and had no reason to give up now. The first thing I did was check my backpack. Inside, I only had a bottle of water, a few biscuits, and sunscreen. It wasn't enough to survive long in these harsh desert conditions. I wished I had been better prepared, but I couldn't forget Ethan's words before they left me. "Good luck getting home, Mom." Those words felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just a cold remark from someone indifferent, but a complete rejection of the love and care I had given my daughter throughout my life. I looked towards the horizon, where the endless desert stretched far and wide. No signs of life anywhere. Regardless, I had to start walking to move so that I wouldn't die from the scorching heat. But every step I took felt heavier. I was no longer young, my tired old legs already fatigued. Before long, I started to feel the exhaustion setting in. The loneliness inside me was no longer a fleeting feeling, but a haunting presence. I knew I had to keep going, but with every step, everything seemed to grow more and more hopeless. Under the desert's blazing sun, my body began to weaken. The water had run out, and the biscuits in my backpack didn't help much. My steps slowed, and I felt the reality of having nothing left to cling to. There was no James to lean on, no one to care for me. I could hardly believe my daughter could do this to me, and Ethan, the man I once thought was a decent son-in-law, was the one who orchestrated it all. My eyes began to blur, and I felt overwhelming exhaustion taking over. Though I tried to stay strong, I couldn't avoid the feeling of helplessness. Lily had taught me a painful lesson in this life. Greed can overshadow all sincere emotions. Maybe she didn't love me enough to understand that family ties cannot be bought with money. Lily's apologies when we meet again will never erase the fact that her mother had been abandoned like a discarded object. Then I met Hakeem. I didn't know where he came from, but he was a Bedouin living in this desert. One day, when I was struggling to find a small water source I thought I saw in the distance, he suddenly appeared. Hakeem looked at me for a moment, then approached, pointing out signs of life that I couldn't recognize in my exhausted state. He helped me find shade, gave me some water, and showed me how to extract more water from the morning dew. He taught me survival skills that I never thought I would need, no matter how simple they seemed. At that moment, I began to realize that the frailty of old age wasn't something insurmountable. I may have been physically weak, but within me there was still an inner strength I hadn't recognized. The feeling of helplessness gradually disappeared, and I started to feel more confident. I had lived through hard times with James, and I knew I could survive. Nothing was impossible if I was determined enough. Hakeem taught me that while I couldn't change the past, I could decide my future. And now I would not let anyone, whether Lily or Ethan, decide my fate. That sense of strength returned to me like a cool stream, quenching the thirst in my soul. Nothing could defeat this resilience. Over the following days, I learned to overcome my loneliness and face the reality I had never imagined I would endure. But the further I moved forward, the more I realized I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting to reclaim the dignity and autonomy I had lost when they abandoned me. I still couldn't forget the day Hakeem and I found the first water source after days of struggling with thirst. That feeling when the cool water soothed my body was the most precious thing I had ever experienced. And during these days, I began to realize something important, something I might have overlooked during all my years of marriage and motherhood. Family bonds could change, could be exploited, and sometimes the people you love most would be the ones to abandon you when you need them most. When I regained enough strength, I felt ready to face everything. I couldn't let Lily and Ethan continue to see me as useless. I couldn't let them deceive me anymore. They had schemed, and I could do the same. But during all this time, I couldn't help but recall the early days of our trip. From the moment we arrived in Egypt, everything began to change. Lily's looks weren't filled with the concern they once had. Instead, I saw probing glances, as though she was waiting for an opportunity to seize everything. When this trip started, I truly thought it would be a chance for us to rebuild our relationship, for me to feel the love and closeness from the daughter I had lost long ago. But as we delved deeper into the desert with only me, Lily, and Ethan, I began to sense something wasn't right. Ethan, the man I thought was Lily's husband, the one I thought would protect her, showed no concern or sorrow when I was left behind. On the contrary, he seemed overly pleased, as though he had accomplished something significant. Think about it. If a son-in-law truly cared about the family, would he easily leave his mother-in-law in the middle of the desert without hesitation? The answer is no. And when I looked at his face, I realized he was the one behind everything that had happened. Lily wasn't any better. She had no qualms when Ethan decided to leave me behind. It seemed she had no worry at all for her mother's safety. When I looked into Lily's eyes, I saw something I couldn't name. Not love, but greed. She didn't look at me with the affectionate gaze I had once hoped for. She looked at me like a tool, like an asset that could be discarded when no longer needed. But this change didn't happen suddenly. It had been gradually built up from the requests for money after James's death to the small questions about my assets, my husband's will. Lily had gradually pushed me to open up about the wealth I had, things I had never considered sharing with anyone. The more I thought about it, the more I felt the distance between us. She was no longer the child I had raised with all my love. She had become someone I could no longer recognize, someone who could use her mother as a tool to achieve her goals. And when I saw those signs, I began to realize that I was no longer the only person my daughter could trust. The day they left me in the desert, I thought I would die. Not just because of the harshness of nature, but because of the betrayal I was facing. But when I saw Lily and Ethan drive away without hesitation, I didn't just feel disappointment, I felt humiliation. I couldn't forget the cold looks they gave me in that moment. It made me resolve to fight, not just for survival, but for my dignity. I couldn't believe that the people closest to me could treat me this way. And I couldn't overlook the fact that they had planned everything in advance. They didn't just leave me behind, they also had a plan to steal my wealth. They had even prepared to pretend that I was missing so they could access my assets without any obstacles. It was terrifying to think that greed could erode all the values we trust. The days that followed, I felt like I wasn't just fighting the desert, but also fighting my own feelings of betrayal and resentment. Every time I looked back at them, I saw forethought and exploitation. They thought I would collapse, that I would die in the thirst and never find life in this desert. But they were wrong. I survived, and I would make them pay. The day Lily and Ethan drove off, leaving me in the vast desert, everything seemed to plunge into darkness. All that was left was me and the absolute silence of the endless sands. I stood there watching them disappear into the horizon, feeling the sting of their betrayal seared deeper into my heart. My mind was filled with a sense of abandonment, as if I were some useless object they no longer wanted to keep. My steps, the marks I left in the sand, were like a sign of my loneliness and despair. Each step felt heavy, like a battle I couldn't win, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. I couldn't let them see me fall. And no matter what, I couldn't let myself die here in the desert. I asked myself, could I keep going? Could I find water or at least any sign of life? But these questions only made me feel more desperate. No one around, no one to help. Suddenly, I realized that I wasn't just facing the desert. I was facing my own weakness. But then I remembered a saying from James, my late husband, "If you can't make it on your own, then who will help you?" His words hit me like a reminder of the inner strength I had forgotten all these years living with James. I had grown accustomed to having him by my side, my unwavering pillar. But now that he was gone, I had to stand on my own. No one else could help me but myself. I looked back at my backpack. Inside, there was only a few biscuits and a nearly empty water bottle. I began to feel the hopelessness set in, but at that moment, I knew what I had to do next. I began to walk even though I didn't know where I was going, but I understood I couldn't stand still. With each step, the exhaustion weighed heavier on me. But then I thought about Lily and Ethan. I thought about their betrayal. They left me, but they didn't know I wouldn't die here. No matter what they thought, I would keep moving on. Because I knew I could survive. I could overcome this. After a long time crossing the scorching sands, I felt so weak my body no longer obeyed my will. At that moment, I wanted to sit down, but I couldn't. If I stopped, I would never have the strength to keep going. So I forced myself to stand, to keep moving forward, even though I didn't know where I was heading. Walking through the desert, I began to see the loneliness of old age, the fragility of a woman without anyone to protect her. Everything felt so slow, like time had stopped. But just when I was ready to give up, I saw a small cloud in the sky, like a sign of life. I walked toward it, and then I found a small oasis, a water source, a place of shade. It felt like I had discovered treasure after so many days of struggle. The feeling of cool water on my body was miraculous. I drank the first sip I had in the entire day, and immediately I felt my strength begin to return. I found shelter under a tree and decided to rest for a while. Though I knew I couldn't stop for too long, I felt I needed to regain my strength. But as I sat down and looked back at my journey, I couldn't help but wonder, could I take revenge on them? Could I make Lily and Ethan pay for what they had done to me? The answer was clear in my heart. They would not go unpunished for what they had done. Then a man appeared. He was Hakim, a Bedouin living in this desert. Hakim didn't seem special at first, but his eyes were kind and full of concern. He naturally helped me, giving me water and advice on how to survive in the desert. I felt like I was saved, and the warmth of his kindness dispelled the loneliness I had felt in the past days. Hakim taught me how to survive in the harsh desert conditions. He not only showed me how to find water, but also pointed out signs of life in an environment that seemed hopeless. I realized then that I wasn't weak. I could rise. I could fight to survive. The following days, Hakim and I began to move together. He led me to a safe place, an area where I could regain my health and prepare for the next steps in my journey. When I looked into Hakim's eyes, I saw not just help, but also a deep understanding of life. He knew that I wasn't just fighting the desert, but also fighting against the betrayal and pain caused by Lily and Ethan. Each day I felt stronger. I no longer felt fear or anger. Instead, there was calm and determination. I knew that I would never let them win. That feeling had deeply settled within me, like a promise to myself that I would survive and I would make them pay for what they did. As I entered the following days of this difficult journey, everything began to change. I was no longer the woman abandoned in the desert, no longer the weak mother suffering from betrayal. Each step I took seemed like a rebirth, an awakening, not just physically, but spiritually. The loneliness and helplessness I had felt earlier were now replaced by a fierce inner fire. I could no longer ignore the fact that I had stood in the desert with no one, no safety net but myself. But now I had learned to stand up to find my own path to life. Hakim continued to help me, teaching me how to use resources I had never considered. Under the harsh desert sun, he showed me how to find water from morning dew, which plants were edible, and how to keep my body cool in such a harsh environment. These lessons not only helped me survive, but made me feel stronger and stronger. The sense of autonomy began to return to me step by step. When we found a clean water source, I sat by the stream, exhausted, but no longer feeling lonely. Next to me was Hakim, my companion, whom I never imagined I would find in such a situation. He wasn't someone who spoke much, but his words were full of meaning. They weren't just survival tips for the desert, but words of encouragement that I hadn't found from anyone else. One day, while sitting together in a quiet patch of sand, Hakim looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Martha, I see something in your eyes that few people have. Inner strength. If you can survive these days, I believe you will find a way to face any challenge in life." He was right. What I once thought of as weakness, the fears I thought I couldn't overcome, had now become my motivation. The image of Lily and Ethan leaving me behind was no longer a pain I had to carry, but a reminder of the price they would have to pay. But just as I started to regain my confidence, I couldn't help but think about Lily. The way she looked at me before she left, the way she had no hesitation when leaving me in the most dangerous situation of my life made me unable to forget it. Lily was my daughter, the one I had loved with all my heart. But now I began to realize that love can fade when faced with greed and selfishness. Each night when I lay under the starry desert sky, I wondered about the decisions Lily and Ethan made. Why did they do this to me? How could they leave a mother, someone who had spent her life caring for them? The feelings of anger and humiliation rose in me, but I didn't let myself fall. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting to survive, but fighting for justice for what they had done to me. I couldn't let them get away with this easily. When I walked out of the desert, I wasn't just leaving behind a harsh environment, but also a place where I had found myself. The desert didn't only test my body, it was where I reached the limits of my pain and betrayal. Amid the thirst and hunger, I rose. Those days didn't just help me survive, they also allowed me to understand myself better. I was no longer just a mother, just an older woman. I was someone capable of revenge, someone who could face those who hurt me with wisdom and determination. When we left the water source area, I began making plans. Hakeem, though a good man, always encouraged me to act slowly to remain calm. But deep inside, I had already crafted a plan for revenge. Hakeem was a kind companion, but he didn't understand my pain. He was just my companion on the journey, while I was the one fighting to restore my dignity and justice. I didn't need to confront Lily and Ethan directly just yet. They thought I was dead, and that was my advantage. While they believed everything was over, I was creating a different game, one that I would control. This revenge wouldn't come through violence or blind retaliation. It would be a calculated, sharp plan, just like how I had lived my life for so many years. One day, when we arrived in a small town near the border, I decided it was time to start executing my plan. By this point, I was strong enough to continue the journey, and I began taking the first steps of my strategy. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to show Lily and Ethan that even though they left me for dead, I was still the one in control. I used all the relationships I had built over the years, the people who knew James, friends who had trusted me. They didn't know what had happened between me and my daughter, but I believed they would help when I needed it. The first thing I did was call a lawyer James had trusted, Michael Turner. He was a renowned lawyer, and I knew he could help me protect my assets and create legal strategies to prevent Lily and Ethan from accessing my wealth. I didn't want to just be deceived. I wanted them to feel the loss they had caused me. When Michael agreed to help, I began gathering all the information I could about Lily and Ethan. I contacted the banks where James had worked before he passed away. I started checking accounts and the terms of James's will. I knew that in the small details, in the legal loopholes, I could find ways to protect myself and even turn the situation around. I began searching for every document I could use as evidence, from financial contracts to the drafts of the will James had signed before his death. Hakeem was a good friend, but he wasn't someone who understood the power games and money matters. He couldn't understand that I couldn't just let Lily and Ethan continue like this, that I couldn't let them access what wasn't theirs. When I told Hakeem about my plan, he nodded quietly. I knew he didn't agree with everything, but I also knew this was the path I had to take, and I had to walk it alone. Over the following days, I spent a lot of time working with Michael, laying out a detailed plan to prevent Lily and Ethan's advances. I couldn't let them turn my wealth into their own without any resistance. The feeling of loss had taught me that money wasn't the most important thing, but protecting my rights and my justice was something I had to uphold. So I decided not only to stop their game, but to turn the tables on them. One of the crucial steps was reviewing all the documents related to James's will. I knew he had made provisions to protect me and to prevent anyone from exploiting the assets after he passed away. After going over the legal documents, I discovered something important. James had left a fund in a trust, and if I were abandoned under any circumstances, the money would go to charity. This was the key to maintaining control over my assets. One morning, when I got a call from Michael, he told me they had found errors in the documents Lily and Ethan had used to try to access my wealth. At that moment, I felt the first wave of victory in my revenge journey. Everything wasn't just about surviving, it was about standing my ground, not letting anyone take what I rightfully deserved. I understood that Lily and Ethan thought they had eliminated me from this game, but I would show them that I was still the one in control. After weeks of preparation, I was finally ready. I was no longer the weak mother that Lily and Ethan thought they could easily abandon. I had fought against myself, fought against the loneliness and betrayal, and now I was preparing for the final battle. Everything I had done until now wasn't just to protect my wealth, but to restore the justice I had lost. I would face Lily and Ethan, and I would make them pay for what they had done to me. My plan became more feasible when I received information from Michael that Lily and Ethan were once again trying to access my wealth. They had begun attempting different methods to seize what they thought was rightfully theirs. However, they didn't know that I had already set up an incredibly strong defense system. Their traces had been tracked by me for a long time, and each of their moves had been documented in the legal papers I had prepared. I couldn't let them think I was still an easy target, someone they could force into doing whatever they wanted. The past days had taught me many lessons, and most importantly, I had learned to take control of the game. Lily and Ethan thought they were in charge of everything, but I would make them realize that I was the one holding the cards. When I arrived in Minneapolis and faced those two, there was no affection, no sweet words or fake concern. They only looked at me with suspicion, as if I had no right to speak. But now, I knew I didn't need to stay silent anymore. My revenge had already begun. In the first meeting after I returned, I sat across from them in a room thick with tension. Lily and Ethan stared at me, the fear and confusion starting to creep into their eyes, but I remained unshaken. "Mom, I know you're still alive," Lily said, her voice full of fear. "But why did you do this? Why didn't you tell us you were okay?" I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked straight into her eyes. I didn't need to explain to Lily everything I had gone through, the days she and Ethan had abandoned me. I knew very well that everything I was doing was to protect what I had built over my lifetime. They thought they could beat me, but no, I would show them what justice really looked like. Because you and Ethan made the wrong choices, and now it's time to pay the price, I said, my voice calm but full of resolve. Lily went quiet for a moment, but Ethan kept his defiant look. I wasn't surprised. He had never been afraid, and he never thought about the consequences of his actions. I looked at them once more, and then I began recounting everything from the moment they left me in the desert to how I had survived and eventually gathered enough evidence to confront them. A feeling of satisfaction rose in me as I watched them begin to panic. Not only did I have proof of their actions, but I had also found documents they thought would help them claim my wealth. But now everything was about to be exposed. "Do you think you can take what's not yours without paying the price?" I asked, my gaze sharp. Lily and Ethan didn't say anything. They just went silent. I knew they were beginning to realize that they had gone too far. But I didn't want to stop just because they were starting to panic. Everything had gone too far, and I couldn't forgive their actions. I continued, "I've protected my wealth by any means necessary, and now I will use everything to stop you from accessing it." I knew I could do this not just by using the legal documents I had prepared, but also by using relationships I had built over the years. Michael had helped me set up a detailed legal strategy, and I had filed a lawsuit in court requesting an investigation into Lily and Ethan's actions. The evidence I had would make them face accusations of fraud, abuse of assets, and exploitation of trust. They couldn't escape. They couldn't avoid the justice that I was holding in my hands. When I filed the lawsuit, I felt a strange sense of fulfillment. They would never be able to access my wealth, and they would have to face the legal consequences they never anticipated. Everything had been prepared meticulously, and now was the time to prove to Lily and Ethan that not everything in life could be bought with money. Justice would prevail, and I would make them pay for the betrayal they had caused me. The day I received the court's notification that my lawsuit had been accepted, a powerful sense of justice flooded my heart. I was no longer the weak mother they thought they could abandon. I was no longer the woman who had nearly died from thirst in the desert. I had fought not just for my life, but for the justice and revenge I had longed for all these months. Lily and Ethan could not have imagined that I had gathered enough evidence to expose their entire plan. They had thought that when I was abandoned in the desert, I would not survive to face them again. But now they had to face the truth I had prepared for them. When the lawsuit officially began, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice was on my side, and the revenge I had planned for so long was about to come true. The court began proceedings, and I was present in the cold room, but filled with strength. Lily and Ethan were also there. For the first time, I saw panic clearly reflected on their faces. Ethan, who had always kept his confident look, now could not hide the fear in his eyes. Lily, my daughter, whom I had loved and cared for all these years, was now nothing more than a betrayer, standing in front of me with eyes full of regret but no real remorse. As my lawyer began to present the evidence, I could no longer contain my emotions. The documents, the copies of the contracts that Lily and Ethan had used to try to seize my wealth, were now the mirrors reflecting their betrayal and greed. The documents about James's will, the calls they made to prepare for the acquisition of my assets, all had been collected and brought to light. Each time a piece of evidence was revealed, I saw the gradual collapse on their faces. Lily could no longer maintain her coldness. She could not look me in the eye anymore. Her gaze was full of guilt, but I didn't feel any real remorse from her. Ethan, however, still tried to maintain his cocky demeanor, but I could clearly see the fear consuming him. He no longer had the courage to face me, and I understood that no matter how hard he tried, everything he had done would now be exposed. As the court continued to investigate, further details began to unfold. Not only had I found evidence of Lily and Ethan's fraudulent actions, but I also discovered painful truths about their lives. Ethan was not just a greedy man. He also had serious financial problems that no one knew about. The enormous debts he had borrowed from people who weren't easy to forgive had driven him into despair. He had seen me as the final prey to erase his debt and continue living, but he didn't know that I had seen through his plan long ago. Now both Lily and Ethan had to face the consequences of their actions. The court ruled that they would not only lose all my assets, but would also have to pay compensation and face legal reprimands. Their actions could not be forgiven, and justice had triumphed. They would have to endure consequences they never could have imagined. I hadn't just won the case in court, but I had also won the internal battle within myself. For the first time in my life, I felt like a true winner. My revenge wasn't a bloody battle, but a fight of intelligence and patience. I had used wisdom and strategy to defeat those who tried to exploit me. Lily and Ethan didn't just lose money, they lost the love of a mother, of a wife who had devoted her life to caring for and loving them. And when everything was over, I realized that what I had found in this journey was an inner strength I had never imagined. When everything concluded in the courtroom, I felt like I had just emerged from a great storm. But just like after every storm, I knew my life would never be the same again. Lily and Ethan had faced the consequences of what they had done to me, and while that might have been part of my healing process, I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. They had lost what they had longed for, but I had also lost what was most important in my life. The days of pain and betrayal could not easily be erased. I had won the legal battle, but this victory couldn't return what I had lost. Lily was no longer my daughter, and Ethan was no longer a part of my life. I had no regrets about my decisions, but deep inside, I knew that nothing could replace the love and bond of family. After the lawsuit, I felt a great emptiness. I no longer had to face the lies or betrayal from my own daughter, but at the same time, I had nothing to fill the void that Lily had left behind. While I felt that I had protected what I rightfully deserved, I also realized that I had to start over to rebuild my life from the ruins. After everything, I decided to return to Minneapolis, where I had lived happily with James. Since he passed away, I had not wanted to stay in the old house, a place filled with so many memories of family. But now, when I had nothing left to hold on to, I understood that I needed to find a new space, a place to start fresh. The small house in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city became the place where I began my new life. It was very different from the house I had lived in for so many years. But this new space, though small, gave me a sense of freedom I had never felt before. Each morning, I would wake up and watch the first rays of sunlight shine through the window, feeling the peace and stillness I had long been missing. There were no sounds of Lily's laughter, no conversations with Ethan, but I started to find joy in the stillness. I had once thought my life was over when James passed away, when I had to face the betrayal of my daughter. But now I understood that my life had never ended, and I was the one who decided how to live it. Yes, I had been betrayed, but I had also learned how to rise again and start over. I couldn't let those who abandoned me determine my life. I had the right to choose my own path, and I chose a new one. I began to engage in activities I had never tried before, things I never had time for when I was busy caring for my family. I joined a book club, started cooking the dishes I loved, and spent time taking care of my small garden. A few times I sat quietly in that garden, watching the trees grow, and telling myself that I would make my life meaningful, even if I had to start from scratch. In the evenings, I would walk around the neighborhood, looking at the people living around me, feeling the freshness of life, something I had never considered before. After all the pain and betrayal, I realized I could still live and enjoy life in ways I had never imagined. I no longer needed to look back at the past, at the painful memories. Instead, I looked ahead where new opportunities were waiting. I had once been a mother, a wife, but now I was a free woman, no longer controlled by anyone. I was the one who decided my life, and I would not let anyone, not even Lily or Ethan, make me feel unworthy of a happy and complete life. In the following weeks, I began to reconnect with old friends I had lost contact with after James passed away. Some people still remembered me, those who had seen me struggle and suffer for so long. They helped me see life with more optimism and showed me that I could still love and be loved. I had regained faith in myself and in the people around me. When I sat in my new home looking out the window, I felt an unusual joy rise in my heart. My new life might not be perfect, but it was mine. I no longer had to endure those who had hurt me. This freedom was the greatest gift I had gotten after all the loss and pain. Though Lily and Ethan could do whatever they wanted, I had won. I hadn't just regained what was mine, but more importantly, I had regained my life, and I would not let anyone take that away from me. As I look back at the journey I have been through, from the painful days in the desert to the victory in court, I realize that every challenge in life is a valuable lesson. What I went through wasn't just the betrayal of my daughter, but also a journey of self-discovery and finding strength I never knew I had. Life is sometimes full of losses, but it is also an opportunity for us to learn and grow. For me, what I overcame wasn't just about regaining wealth or justice. In fact, I conquered myself, overcoming the pain and fear I had carried within me for so many years. My life from now on won't just be about surviving, but about living in a way that I accept myself and won't let anyone hurt me again. Each day, I learn not to be bound by the past. Instead, I look ahead where new opportunities and possibilities await. Every morning when I wake up, I remind myself that I have the right to own my life. I don't need to live in the shadow of betrayal, nor in the fear of those who exploited me. Freedom and justice are what I truly deserve, and I will not let anyone, even my daughter or anyone close to me, take that from me. I still remember those moments in the courtroom when everything was finally revealed. The evidence I had gathered helped me win not just the legal battle, but also the internal struggle within myself. When I stood in front of Lily and Ethan, I didn't feel disgust or anger. What I felt was a strange sense of calm, as if I had completed my mission. I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for those I had loved and protected my whole life. From fighting against myself to protecting what I deserved, I have learned that there is nothing more valuable than self-respect and self-love. The people around us can change, but if we don't learn to value ourselves, we will never stand strong. Now I can look back and understand that in every storm of life, the important thing is not to avoid the storm, but how we stand strong after it. No matter what Lily and Ethan do, I have learned to adapt and rise again. Everything I lost cannot compare to what I have regained. I have found myself again. But revenge, whether subtle or not, is not the key point of this story. I didn't act out of a desire for revenge, but because I couldn't allow myself to be defeated. After everything that happened, I realized that not everyone deserves forgiveness, and sometimes only by facing the truth in a strong and decisive way can we find the right path. My story is not just about betrayal, but about how we see ourselves in the toughest circumstances. Life is not always fair, but we can choose to stand up and move forward no matter how difficult. I chose this path not just because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to take control of my life. I no longer have to endure a family that betrayed me. I fought and reclaimed my freedom. Lily and Ethan can't take away what I rightfully deserve. What they lost isn't just money, but the love of a mother, a wife who once devoted herself to care for and love them. And when everything ended, I realized that what I found in this journey was the inner strength I never knew I had. Now my life continues not with revenge, but with peace and satisfaction in who I have become. I don't need to cling to what's past. I just need to live true to myself and create a new life, one that I deserve. Because in the end, when you understand your own worth, you'll never let anyone make you feel you don't deserve happiness.